Download and upload more than ever before with an ultra-fast fiber connection. With 3 simple steps, you can be the one with an SLT fiber optic connection. Visit slt.lk.
Troubled waters. UNHRC tells Sri Lanka to be consistent with the implementation of Resolution 30/1.
The UN opposes to applicate any death penalty.
Sri Lanka too takes a stand in Geneva.
It must be asserted that there are no proven allegations against individuals on war crimes.
Strained ties. Singapore clarifies they are not sheltering former CBSL Governor Arjuna Mahendran. Rejects claims by President Maithripala Sirisena on their lack of support. Jackpot. Construction of an oil refinery lands Sri Lanka its highest ever foreign direct investment for a single project. Fate of the budget. Prime Minister says the success of the budget is in its implementation.
The fate of the budget doesn't lie in the votes in Parliament. It's how we implement it thereafter, and that of the country.
All this and much more coming up on First at 9 this Wednesday, the 20th of March 2019.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Well, a very good evening and welcome to First at 9 on AdaDerana 24, Sri Lanka's news channel. I'm Katharina Chang. Now moving on to our top story tonight. The much anticipated report by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights on the situation of human rights in Sri Lanka was officially presented to the ongoing 40th regular session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva today. In her report, High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet welcomed the operational status of the Office of Missing Persons and commended the establishment of Office for Reparations as well as releasing much of the military-occupied lands in the north and east. She also acknowledged that these were positive elements of Sri Lanka's commitment towards reform measures mentioned through the UNHRC Resolution 30/1. However, it was apparent that the High Commissioner for Human Rights was not highly impressed with the progress made by the government so far when she called on Sri Lanka to implement the Resolution 30/1 with consistency, comprehensiveness and acceleration. She said this is due to the lack of common vision among Sri Lanka's highest leadership that does not create a conducive environment for reform measures to be implemented. Among some of the key issues she highlighted, Bachelet expressed deep concern on calls to reinstate the death penalty and continuing allegations of torture, human rights violations including sexual violence by security forces. However, on behalf of Sri Lanka, Minister of Foreign Affairs Tilak Marapana expressed some strong views against some of the pressing matters presented in the report.
The events leading to the declaration of a state of emergency in March last year and the constitutional crisis in October created a political environment not conducive to the implementation of reform measures. Today, my office encourages the government to implement a detailed and comprehensive strategy for the transitional process with a fixed timeline. Legislation on the establishment of an independent Truth and Reconciliation Commission could be an important next step. As a former Minister of Defense who has worked in the context of a transition, I can highlight the importance of security force sector reform as part of a transitional justice process. This reform should include a vetting process to remove officers with questionable human rights records. The recent appointment to a senior position in the Sri Lankan Army of Major General Chavendra Silva, implicated in alleged serious violations of international humanitarian and human rights law, is a worrying development. There has been minimal progress on accountability. My report details the steps taken over a lengthy period to address several emblematic cases and the lack of progress in setting up a special judicial mechanism to deal with the worst crimes committed during the 2009 conflict. Replacement of the Prevention of Terrorism Act has been on the government's agenda for 4 years. I encourage the completion of this process. I know with concern that individuals continue to be held under the PTA. I'm also troubled about continuing allegation of torture and other human rights violation by security forces, including sexual violence. effective, transparent and independent investigation by the government, as well as measures to prevent and end such practices, including through full implementation of the 2016 recommendation of the Committee Against Torture, would be positive. I'm deeply concerned about the calls to reinstate the application of the death penalty after more than 40 years of moratorium. I emphasize that in co-sponsoring Resolution 30/1 and 34/1, the government recognized the need to address the past in order to build a future securely grounded in accountability, respect for human rights and the rule of law. For victims and for society, this need continues.
After highlighting the progress on commitments towards Resolution 30/1 since 2017, Minister of Foreign Affairs Tilak Marapan expressed the government's strong stance on several key issues mentioned in the report by the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
You would agree that post-conflict milieu of each country is unique. We can learn from others' experiences, but our own path to reconciliation will be primarily driven by the domestic context in which we function. I would like to emphasize that the data reflected in the High Commissioner's report that only 75% of the land occupied by the security forces as at 2009 has been released is at significant variance with the actual numbers. As at March 2019, 88.87% of state lands and 92.16% of private lands have been released. As for the mass graves in Mana, despite the test results obtained from a USA laboratory revealing that the said skeletal remains date back to 1499 to 1719 AD, the report presupposes other mass graves might be expected to be found in the future. An assumption of this nature in a public report on a matter of this magnitude and seriousness will not be acceptable and may even cast a doubt as regards the other assertions that are contained in the report. In referring to para 68C of the OHCHR report, which calls for legislation establishing a hybrid court, I wish to make it clear that if non-citizen judges are to be appointed in such a process, it will not be possible without an amendment to the Constitution by 2/3 of the members of Parliament voting in favour and also the approval of the people at a referendum. At a time the world is confronted with increasing acts of terrorism and violent extremism, the action by the Sri Lankan security forces during the conflict was against a group designated as a terrorist organization by many countries and not against any community. It must be asserted that there are no proven allegations against individuals on war crimes or crimes against humanity in the OISL report of 2015 or in any subsequent official document. It is therefore an injustice to deprive any serving or retired officer of the Sri Lankan security forces or the police of their rights. While countries, including the co-sponsors, acknowledge these ground realities in conversations, these incongruities should be corrected in letter as well, particularly at a time, as recently demonstrated during the political developments in late 2018, our judicial, bureaucratic and defense institutions have demonstrated independence, resilience, robustness and resolve.
Meanwhile, making a special statement during the session today, Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka said that it has not yet received any complaints or information regarding cases of abduction, unlawful detention and sexual violence as mentioned in the High Commissioner's report. The Sri Lankan Human Rights Commission therefore called on the UN body to provide necessary information to inquire into these serious allegations.
While our Commission agrees with the High Commissioner's assessment of the general human rights situation in Sri Lanka, our Commission has yet to receive complaints or information on cases of abduction, unlawful detention and sexual violence referred to at paragraph 56 of the High Commissioner's report. No entity that has made such allegations has provided our Commission with specific information sufficient to commence an inquiry. Hence, the Office of the High Commissioner must provide necessary information to inquire into these serious allegations.
Meanwhile, representatives from several countries expressed their views on the report today.
We urge the government of Sri Lanka to take immediate and sustained action to implement its commitments and institute a durable reconciliation process, including through building confidence by completing the return of occupied land, replacing the PTA and advancing the identified transitional justice mechanisms.
Pakistan supports the efforts and actions of Sri Lankan government against designated terrorist groups and organizations. Sri Lanka has overcome many challenges, particularly the grave challenge of cross-border terrorism. This Council must acknowledge this achievement. We urge the international community and the OHCHR to encourage and assist Sri Lanka in finding solutions and following policies in line with its national priorities and aspirations and the wishes of its people.
As Sri Lanka's closest neighbour, India cannot remain untouched by developments there. India has always supported efforts to preserve Sri Lanka's character. We take note of the progressive implementation of the commitments made by Sri Lanka and look forward to the implementation of its other important commitments, including implementation of the 13th Amendment that meets the aspirations of the Tamil community.
The High Commissioner's report makes clear much remains to be done to meet the needs and expectations of victims from all communities in Sri Lanka, and we're disappointed that more progress has not been made. We continue to urge the government to prioritise the steps required to deliver fully on its commitments in Resolutions 30.1 and 34.1 and to develop a comprehensive and time-bound implementation strategy.
We encourage Sri Lanka to take the following steps without delay: to end impunity by enacting domestic legislation that criminalizes violations of international law without statutes of limitation; establish a judicial mechanism with special counsel to prosecute violations of international law with the involvement of international investigators, prosecutors and judges.
Following the session on Sri Lanka today, the government as well as NGO representatives expressed the following views to media.
සමහරක් දේවල් අපිට අපි රාජ්‍යයක් හැටියට අපි ස්වාධීන රටක් හැටියට ස්වෛරී භාවය හැටියට අපි කිසිදාක් නොකරන දේවල් තියෙනවා.
නමුත් විදේශීය විනිකරණ ගේන්න අවශ්‍ය නැහැ. මොකද විදේශීය අධිකරණයට අපේ රණවිරුවන්ව පාවා දීලා අවසන්. අනිත් එක තමයි ඔබතුමා කියන විදිහට දැන් සමහර ඒවා ව්‍යවස්ථාව අනුව කරන්නේ නැත්නම් ඇයි අපි මේ යෝජනාවට සමානුග්‍රහකත්වය දැක්වේ?
ඒකෙන් කියන්නේ නැහැ ඒගොල්ලෝ කියන දේවල් පිළිගන්නවා කියලා. ඒක තමයි මම හිතන්නේ අපි නෑ අපේ ප්‍රකාශය මෙතන මිනිත්තු 4යි දෙන්නේ. අපි ලිඛිත ප්‍රකාශය බලන්නකෝ.
Meanwhile, former Army Commander Field Marshal Sarath Fonseca says that he has in his possession videos as well as audio evidence to prove crimes committed by army officials.
මගේ ස්ථාවරයේ තමයි ඔය සමහරු එක එක නීති විරෝධී වැඩ කරලා තියෙනවා සමහර හමුදා නිලධාරීන් විශේෂයෙන්ම යුද්ධ ඉවරුණාට පස්සේ යුද්ධ යනකොට නෙමෙයි ඒ වගේ 4-5 දිනකට චෝදනා තියෙනවා ඒවා අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම මානව හිමිකම් කවුන්සිලේ කියනකයි ඉන්න ඕනේ නැහැ ලංකාවේ නීතිය තියෙනවා ලංකාවේ නීතිය හැමෝට ඒගොල්ලෝ ගේන්න ඕනේ ඔබතුමාටත් අපි දැක්ක විපක්ෂයෙන් චෝදනා කරනවා සුදු කොඩි නඩුවේදී ඔබතුමාත් ඒකට සම්බන්ධයි කියලා යටත් වෙන්න එන අයට යටත් වෙන්න දෙනවද දිය යුතුද නැද්ද කියන ඒවා කතා බහ වෙච්ච ගැන අපි ගාව සාක්ෂි තියෙනවා අපි අවශ්‍ය වුණොත් ඒවා ඉදිරිපත් කරනවා වීඩියෝ පටහඬ වා තියෙනවා මං ගාව ඒතර මේ
Singapore rejected President Maithripala Sirisena's allegation it was sheltering former Central Bank Governor Arjuna Mahendran today, saying Colombo failed to provide documents to support its extradition request. According to media reports, a spokesperson for Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said authorities in the city-state have been cooperating with their Sri Lankan counterparts on the case since January. On Monday, President Maithripala Sirisena expressed his disappointment over the lack of support provided by the Singapore government on legal proceedings against former Central Bank Governor Arjuna Mahendran, despite appealing to Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong in January to return Mahendran, who is believed to be in Singapore. However, according to media reports today, Singapore rejected the president's allegation and affirmed they were not sheltering a former central bank chief wanted for fraud and added that Colombo failed to provide documents to support its extradition request. The report went on to say that a spokesperson for Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said authorities in the city-state have been cooperating with their Sri Lankan counterparts on the case since January. Furthermore, the spokesperson for Singapore told AFP that Sri Lanka's request to return Mahendran lacks certain information required under Singapore's extradition laws, and the city-state has requested Colombo to provide them. The report went on to note, however, that to date Singapore has not yet received the requested supporting information and documents and look forward to receiving the necessary information. The report added that once the necessary information is received, Singapore can consider the request further in accordance with its laws. The report goes on to say that Singapore can extradite fugitives to declared Commonwealth countries, which includes Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, President Maithripala Sirisena says that the number of kidney patients have drastically decreased due to the government's efforts in eradicating the disease. He said this addressing the function to declare open the Med Sirisavana Kidney Patients Relief Service Welfare and Research Centre affiliated to the Anuradhapura General Hospital today. President Maithripala Sirisena declared open MedSiri Savana, a kidney patients relief service, welfare and research centre affiliated with the Anuradhapura General Hospital today. The centre was built at a cost of 437 million rupees, utilising the funds of the National Kidney Fund.
2015 ජනවාරි මාසයේ පැවති 8 වෙනිදා ජනාධිපති වරණයට මම ඉදිරිපත් වෙච්ච වෙලාවේ රටේ විශාල වශයෙන් මට හිතවත් ඒ මැතිවරණ ව්‍යාපාරයට ශක්තිය දුන්න උදවිය මැතිවරණ ව්‍යාපාරයට මුදල් දෙන්න ඉදිරිපත් වුණා. ඒ වැය කරන මුදල් සියල්ලම අපි ආරම්භ කරන වකුගඩු අරමුදලක් සඳහා ලබා දෙන්න කියලා මම එදා අපේක්ෂකයෙක් විදියට පුජ්‍යලික බැංකු ගිණුමක් ආරම්භ කළා. ඒ පුජ්‍යලික බැංකු ගිණුමට මිලියන් 100 ගණනක් ජනතාව පරිත්‍යාග කළා. මම ජනාධිපති ධූරයට පත් වුණාට පස්සේ 2015 පළවෙනි අයවැය යෝජනාව තුල මගේ පුජ්‍යලික බැංකු ගෙනුම රජයේ ජාතික වගුවඩු අරමුදල් වශයෙන් නම් කළා. මම ඉතාමත් සතුටු වෙනවා රජයේ මුදල් සතයක්වත් වැය කරන්නේ නැතුව මේ විදිහේ විශාල ගොඩනැගිලි දෙකක් මේ ජනතාවට පරිත්‍යාග කිරීමට ලැබීම පිළිබඳව.
Meanwhile, opposition leader Mahinda Rajapaksa is hopeful that the Sri Lanka Freedom Party will vote against the budget on the 5th of next month. Addressing a function held at the Tangor Pradesh Sabha this morning, the opposition leader also expressed his views on the delayed elections.
අපි පළාත් සභා මැතිවරණ ඉල්ලනවා දෙන්නේ නැහැ. දැන් අපි උසාවි ගිහිල්ලා තියෙනවා. නීතිඥ මහත්මයෙක් තව සුපිරි උසාවියෙන් අහනලුවක් දාලා තියෙනවා. මම හිතනවා මැතිවරණ කරසස්. එළියේ කියන දේ මැතිවරණයක් තියන්න ඕන කියන දේ උසාවියට යයි කියලා මම විශ්වාස කරනවා. අපි විශ්වාස කරනවා ගිය පාර නිහඬ වෙච්ච ශ්‍රී ලංකා නිදහස් පක්ෂය මෙවර අපිත් එක්ක මේ අයවැයට විරුද්ධව ඡන්දෙ දෙන්න ඉදිරිපත් වෙයි කියන විශ්වාසය අපිට තියාගන්න. හැබැයි නොරොජ්ජෝලි මම බැලුම් හැදුවේ නැත්තම් මේ අඳුරේ තමයි 140ක් මේ රටේ. අපි සම්පූර්ණයෙන් හදන්න දැස් කරලා තියෙනවා. වැඩ පටන් අරගෙන අවසන් වෙනවා අද වෙනකොට. මේ අයගේ නැත්තුවා.
United National Party parliamentarian Chaminda Vijayasiri claims that leader of the UMP, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, disrupted plans set by the UMP backbenchers to defeat the expenditure heads on the president. The UMP backbencher Chandima Gamage too aired similar views, adding, however, that legal measures were taken to block the vote against it.
අපි කිව්වා ජනාධිපති වෛශීෂ්‍ය පරාජය කරනවා කියලා. අපේ නායකයා කොහොම හරි ආයේ මෛත්‍රීපාල සිරිසේන ජනාධිපතිතුමා බේරගත්තා. ඉතින් අපේ නායකයාත් එක්ක අපි තරහ නැහැ. රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහ මහත්තයා ඒ වෙලාවේ හොඳ දෙයක් කරයි කියලා සමාජයේ දකිනවා. අපිත් හිතනවා රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහ නායකතුමා අවසාන මොහොතේ පසුපෙළේ අපේ හඬ අපේ වැඩපිළිවෙල කඩලා විඳලා විනාශ කරා. හැබැයි අපි අපේ හෘද සාක්ෂියට එකගව රටේ ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදයට කරපු වැඩපිළිවෙලට ඒ වගේම රටේ 62 ලක්ෂක ජන මතයට පයින් ගහපු එකේ වැඩපිළිවෙලෙ අපිට පුළුවන් ශක්ති ප්‍රමාණයෙන් අපි පාර්ලිමේන්තුව තුළ කටයුතු කරා කියන සතුට මට තියෙන තමුන්නාස්ලා වෙනවා.
එතන පොඩි නීතිමය ගැටලුවක් ආවා. මොකද ආණ්ඩු පක්ෂයක ඉඳන් වෛශීෂ්‍යක විරුද්ධව හෝ පනතකට විරුද්ධව ඡන්දයක් ඉල්ලනකොට මම ඉස්සෙල්ලා ආණ්ඩු පක්ෂය තුලින් තව ඡන්දයක් විමසනවා. ඒ ඡන්දය දිය යුතුද නැද්ද කියලා. අපි ඒ සම්බන්ධයෙන් අපේ නිවැරදි උපදෙස් ලැබිලා තිබුණේ නැහැ. ඒ නිසා ආගමැතිවරයා මැදිහත් වෙලා ඒ ඡන්දය අවශ්‍ය නැහැ කියලා ඒකමතිව සම්මත කරන්න කටයුතු කරා.
Former Defence Secretary Gotabaya Rajapaksa says that he has full confidence to win the confidence of the minority community in the country in the event that he contests the presidential election.
මොන වගේ වාතාවරණයක් ගනීද ඔබතුමා දැන් ඉදිරිපත් වෙනවා කියලා කවුරුත් කියනවා.
අපේ පොදු ජන පෙරමුණේ දේශපාලන පදනම මුල් කරගෙන ඒ කාර්යය ඉස්සරහට ගෙනියනවා.
ඔබ සජ්ජාතිය පක්ෂයේ කරු ජයසූරිය මැතිතුමත් ඉදිරි ජනාධිපතිවරණයට එනවයි කියලා. ඔබතුමාට අභියෝගයක් වෙයිද ඔබතුමා?
නෑ ඉතින් ඔව්.
දැන් මිනිස්සුන්ගේ මතයක් තියෙනවානේ දැන් සමහරවිට මේ යුද්ධයට නායකත්වය දුන්න කෙනාට පුළුවන් රටේ ජනාධිපතිකම කරන්න කියලා එහෙම එකක් තියෙනවා.
ජනතාව ඇයි මාව එහෙම ඉල්ලන්නේ ඔය කියන විදියට ඒ අය මගෙන් දැකපු ඒ අයට අවශ්‍ය ලක්ෂණ තියෙන හින්දා ජනතාව දැක්කා මගේ වැඩ කිරීමේ තිබෙන හැකියාව.
දේශපාලනේ නායකත්වයට ආවට පස්සේ මේ සාම්ප්‍රදායික දේශපාලනත්වයට මේ නායකයෝ වැටෙනවා ඉබේටම. ගෝඨාභය රාජපක්ෂ මහත්තයාට විශ්වාසයක් තියනවද එහෙම නොවැටි රටේ නායකත්වයේ කෙලින් ඉස්සරහට ගෙනියන්න පුළුවන් වෙයි කියලා?
මගේ බලාපොරොත්තුවක් නැහැ. දිගින් දිගටම දේශපාලනයේ රැඳිලා ඉන්න. ඉතින් මම ඉස්සරහට වැඩ කරන්නේත් හුදෙක්ම අරමුණ ඉෂ්ට කර ගැනීම සඳහා පමණයි.
ඔබතුමා හිතනවද සුළු ජන කොටස්වල ප්‍රසාදය දැනෙන්නේ කියලා?
අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම මට පුළුවන්. මොකද ඒගොල්ලන්ටත් වැටහෙනවා හැම පුද්ගලයෙකුටම අද තියෙන තත්ත්වය මොකද්ද කියලා. ඒගොල්ලන්ටත් ඒකෙන් ගොඩ එන්න ඕන. ඉතින් මම තමයි ඉතින් හොඳම උත්තරේ ගොඩ එන්න.
And with that, we cross over to short commercial breaks, so make sure you stay tuned for more news.
You are watching Sri Lanka's #1 news channel. This is AdaDerana 24.
Well, today is Madin Full Moon Poya Day. This Poya Day is significant for Buddhists all over the globe. As it is on a day like this, Prince Siddhartha Gautama, after leaving the royal palace, visited the city of Kimbulwatpura for the first time following his enlightenment. FM Derana held a special Poya Day program which was telecast live from the Sri Pushparama temple in Dunagaha in Dulapitiya. The Poya program entailed the presentation of scholarships to student bhikkhus. Now, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe affirms that the fate of the budget that was presented for the 2019 doesn't lie with the votes in Parliament, but as to how they are implemented following this proposal. Prime Minister said this participating at the Fireside Chat 2019 organised by the International Chamber of Commerce. Diplomats from a number of countries and prominent businessmen attended the event. Speaking at Fireside Chat 2019, the Prime Minister disclosed development efforts carried out by the government in building new roads. When questioned why the public is not aware of these efforts, this was his response.
We are not advertising it. But everywhere now, on Sunday we opened 200 roads one day because there are so many to be done. But remember, we've structured it together so that at last from Kandy to Hambantota, that will be the backbone of the new system. We are a bad lot, but is there any bunch better than us?
What is the government's current relationship with the president? And also about the fate of the budget on the 5th of April.
Well, they said we lose the second reading, we didn't. And the fate of the budget doesn't lie in the votes in Parliament. It's how we implement it thereafter, and that of the country. Relations with the president certainly are not what it was in January 2015, but somehow everyone keeps getting along.
Okay. Dhammika, you'd like to comment on the tourism sector since you have a lot of tourism assets.
The only thing that this reason after the war, I'm asking the connectivity from Katunayaka to Palali. Because even though diaspora want to come to see the Sri Lanka, they want to go to Jaffna, they have no plane. Then they're not going by road. The diaspora will think, from there, and they're dreaming and scolding us. This is the reason. Here, we don't have any problems.
Connectivity. Now we have prepared to allow the private sector to fly anywhere in Sri Lanka. And if you want go from Colombo to Palali to South India, we talked to the Indians also of sending planes into Palali. But someone must take the challenge.
Do we have an overall strategy around that to get more people into the tax net?
I think the tax net is expanding, but you have to remember the base is poor. You cannot tax them. Certain tax burdens have to come on if you are going to raise your revenue from what you had to what you want it to be. But the fact is, despite those burdens, our economy is working in the sense that after a long time, we are having positive balances. You hold it for another year or two, and you will see how the investments come in. It's not a good thing to say that there have been burdens, but where would you have been if you didn't increase the revenue?
Currently, Sri Lanka's per capita is around $4,000. What are some of the ideas that you have to get Sri Lanka there?
2014 ඉඳලා අද වෙනකම් 5 years $4,000 trap වෙනවා කියලා World Bank හැමතැනම තියෙනවා. ඒක හින්දා අපි ඉස්සෙල්ලාම 14-15 growth එක නැති වෙනකොට අපි දැක්කා මේක trap වෙන්න යන්නේ කියලා. The last 5 years only $50 වලින් තමයි GDP එක ඒ වගේ වැඩි වෙන්නේ. $50 වලින් වැඩි වුණොත් 12,000 වලට යන්න 160 years යනවා.
Does Sri Lanka have a strategy of automating some of these services and making it more efficient and accessible to our citizens?
Yes. We have to automate government. We are looking at certain new measures to be taken. But on the other hand, we have the highest number of government servants in the world. So you have to balance both those up. That's one of the issues which we have been discussing. Okay, you have so many at that level. What do you do with them? There's a big political issue. But we have to automate because as we go along, the economy itself must create more work if you're going to have the IT and the knowledge sectors expanding. So balance out, but I think the next 5 years we'll see a large amount of automation taking place in the government sector where we have to create, more work for our local firms.
Meanwhile, an agreement to build an oil refinery and oil tank farm to the tune of $3.85 billion will be signed by Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe on Sunday at the Mirijaville Export Processing Zone in Hambantota. This will be the country's highest ever foreign direct investment received for a single project. In addition, an agreement would also be signed to build a cement manufacturing plant by Lanka Steel Corporation with Onyx Group of the UAE to the value of $100 million. Development Strategies and International Trade Deputy Minister Nalin Bandara said the two projects put together will create over 1,500 direct employment opportunities. The new oil refinery complex is the first to be set up after 1968 and is 100% foreign investment from Singapore and the Sultanate of Oman Ministry of Oil and Gas. Built on a 200-acre plot of land, the project will enable Lanka IOC and CPC to refine oil in the future at a lower price. Former Central Bank Governor Ajit Niwad Kabra points out that the government incurs a huge loss by issuing sovereign bonds at high interest rates. Speaking at a media briefing held in Colombo today, the governor stated that the government now has to pay 151 billion rupees more as a result.
අවුරුදු 7ක් තුලදී ඒ රජය බැදුම් කර නිකුත් කෙරුවා ඩොලර් මිලියන 5500ක් 2015 දී අලුත් රජයක් ආවා. ඒ රජය 2015 සිට 2019 දක්වා ඒ කාලය තුලදී අපි දැක්කා ඇමරිකානු ඩොලර් මිලියන 10050ක බැඳුම් කර දැනට නිකුත් කරලා තියෙනවා. අපේ රජය අවුරුදු 7 කාලයේදී නිකුත් කරපු බැඳුම් කර වලට සාපේක්ෂව 71ක් වැඩිපුර නිකුත් කරලා තියෙනවා. පටන් ගත්තේ අපි නිකුත් කරපු අවුරුදු 5 බැඳුම් කරේට තිබුණේ පොලි අනුපාතය 5.125යි. මේ තිබිච්ච 5.125 2019 මේ ඊයේ පෙරේදා වැඩි කරගත්ත 6.85 බිඳුවට. ඒ අනුව 2019 මාර්තු මාසයේ ජාත්‍යන්තර ස්වෛරී බැඳුම් කර නිකුත් කරලා තියෙන්නේ 7.85 බිඳුවක යන තාමත්ම ඉහළ පොලියට. එනකොට අද වෙනකොට මේ ඩොලර් වලින් ගත්ත බැඳුම් කර වලට ගෙවලා තියෙන වැඩිපුර ගාණ ඒ කියන්නේ රුපියල් බිලියන 151ක් අද වැඩිපුර ගෙවන්න සිදු වෙලා තිනවා. අපිට වියදම් උනේ කොළඹ කටුනායක අධිවේදී මාර්ගය හදන්න රුපියල් බිලියන 48යි. නොරොච්චෝලේ ගල් ලඟුරු තාප බලාගාරය හදන්න ගියේ බිලියන 103යි. ඒ දෙක එකතු කරුවා නම් බිලියන 151යි. ඒ ගානට සමාන ගානක් මේ රජය කාබාසනියා කරලා තිනවා. වැඩිපුර ගෙවලා තිනවා මේ පොලි අනුපාතයෙන් පමණක්.
And with that, we cross over to a short commercial break. Make sure you stay tuned for international news on the other side.
You are watching Sri Lanka's #1 news channel. This is AdaDerana 24.
On international news, UK Prime Minister Theresa May will request a short delay to Brexit today after her failure to get a deal ratified by Parliament left leaving the United Kingdom's divorce from the European Union in turmoil. Nearly 3 years since the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, British politicians are still arguing over how, when or even if the world's fifth largest economy should leave the bloc it first joined in 1973. Now, just 9 days before the exit date, May is to write to European Council President Donald Tusk to ask for a short delay. May had warned lawmakers that she could seek an extension beyond June 30th if they voted down her treaty for a third time.
The United Kingdom is leaving the European Union. This is an historic moment from which there can be no turn.
After sending the tourists, conclude this edition of First at 9. Thank you for joining us and have a pleasant evening.